of General Qasem Soleimani, who was killed in a U.S. drone strike on Friday in Iraq. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister says they don't want war, but they will defend themselves against any aggression. And the U.S. Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA, has banned U.S. airlines from flying over the region. And Washington has warned American ships in the Middle East that Iran could attack its maritime interests. Well, this is all happening as Soleimani is finally laid to rest in his hometown of Kerman after 3 days of mourning. Well, let's show you exactly where those Iranian strikes took place. 2 Iraqi bases were hit. One of them is in Erbil in Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region. The other one was the Ain al-Assad base in western Anbar province. US President Donald Trump visited American troops stationed there back in December 2018. Well, we have a team of correspondents monitoring all the developments. Simona Fulton is in Iraq's capital. Gabriel Elizondo will have more on President Trump's reaction. And Asad Beg is in Tehran. We'll be speaking to them in a moment. But first, this report from Rob Matheson.
This is Iran's promised response to the US assassination of top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Ballistic missiles soaring into the night sky. Their targets 2 Iraqi military bases housing thousands of US soldiers.
Iranians are taking the credit to hit back directly. They wouldn't even leave their proxies to deliver the message to the Americans. It's a kind of saving face for them because killing Soleimani is an insult from the Americans to Iranian establishment, to Iranian state as whole. And therefore, I think Iranian has to retaliate.
On Twitter, this was US President Donald Trump's response. All is well. He's added casualties and damage are being assessed and said, so far, so good. He's also said the US has the most powerful and well-equipped military anywhere in the world by far. The question is whether that military will be used to retaliate against these attacks. US troops are based at the Ain al-Assad air base in Iraq, one of the 2 targets hit by Iranian missiles.
Ever since President Trump scuttled the Iran deal, there has been a steady tit-for-tat escalation. And that, neither side can afford to give in because they'll look weak. The leaders of both sides have committed to this escalation, and it's hard to see how it gets, where the off-ramp is.
The US says its killing of Qasem Soleimani, the leader of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard, in an airstrike was in response to an attack in Iraq in which a US contractor died and for which the US blames Iran. In Iran, huge crowds have been in mourning and demanding revenge for Soleimani's death. An immediate diplomatic solution to the crisis seems unlikely.
Both sides have to be willing to engage in diplomacy, and right now I fear that
Now to the Iranian capital where the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is speaking. Let's listen in to what he has to say.
At the time, you did not see that event. But that day, the memories of that day are alive, from which we should learn some lessons. The past should be the torch for the future. The event on the 19th of the month of Day, it was to defend the position of the great leader of our revolution, who was not there in Iran at the time. The people of Qom, in order to defend him, they came and they stood against the armed and brutal forces of the regime of Shah. They did not have, the people were not armed, they did not have anything in their hands. What made them come to the streets was their faith and their faith in religion and their honor, their faith and their religious honor. When those people, and there were some of the people of the Qom province, of course, When they came to the streets, they took to the streets and they confronted the police and the forces of the regime. Some of them were martyred, some of them were injured. The elements of the regime, they thought they have defeated the people. But the people of Qom, neither the people of Qom nor others, they were not thinking that this movement would be the start of what kind of a huge development, not only inside Iran, but outside Iran as well. It was this movement, this action by people in Qom province, because of their faith and their religious honor. When this happened, God responded, and God blessed this movement, this action, and this continued, and it built up, and it made and encouraged people, more people to come to the streets. And our great leader, Imam Khamenei, led this very well, and it led to the revolution of the next year, of the following year, which was the 57 of our calendar. And so action for some people in Qom province actually was the start of this great revolution. There were other factors, of course, that could be taken into consideration, that should be studied. What is important is that the start of the departure point of this whole revolution was actually based on this movement by people who was based on their faith and their religious honor. With the blessing of our faith and honor, we can do great things. And also, in this event, great things happened, which led to the revolution, a revolution that shook the whole world, that shook the course of the history of our country, the course of the history of the region, and even maybe the course of the history of the world, which will be judged later. With the help of God, we should look at this even from this angle. Instruction of God and the power of the hand of God should be looked at this way, and the impact on our lives. On that day, the people were not armed, but today we are armed. The nation of Iran is equipped today against the bullies of the world. But reliance on military means is not sufficient, of course. Military means can be useful when it's accompanied with faith and religious honor. That's why that's when military equipment, military means can be effective and helpful and open new avenues. Today, we can see this, and we can look at this whenever we are confronting the enemy. When God actually talks about this in the Quran, this is a very clear example of this. Sometimes a small number of people can actually overcome a huge front, a huge number of people, when their will is based on this faith and religious honor. We should not allow this lesson to be forgotten, my dear friends. When it comes to our religious scholars and other colleagues in charge of public relations, whether it's our youth active in cultural issues, whether it's the public. We should not allow this unique lesson that we have to be forgotten. The lesson for the start of this movement that was based on our faith and our honor, blessed by God, and these huge events are created as a result. Almighty God mentions this in the Quran repeatedly, that you should not forget. That things of this nature should not be forgotten, as he clearly mentions in the Quran in this verse about the Israelites. The Israelites one day had such power that although their men and women and children were under the oppression of the pharaohs, but they managed to get rid of the pharaohs. They resisted until God opened a new avenue for them. When the pharaohs were abolished. And these Israelites later on, after a while, in the lapse of time, they came out of that situation. They became, their hearts became more brutal. The faith they had in God, the resistance they had, they lost everything, and the result was that they lost those good qualities. This verse and this relation in the Quran actually is one of the most important ones. When Moses actually told his people that until yesterday, until the pressure, when you were under the pressure of pharaohs, you had the different attitudes, but now you have forgotten all those things. These are lessons from history. These are some of the things that I should always emphasize upon. The quantity and quality of our faithful youth who are committed to the revolution. If we compare it to the beginning of the revolution, they are more faithful now. They are more committed now. Our youth, our young people. We should be more careful that we take the right path and learn these very important divine lessons, as God has mentioned in this verse in the Quran. We should not forget these lessons. About our dear martyr, I would like to mention 2 or 3 points about our dear martyr, Haj Qasim Soleimani. One is about his personality, his character. These days we hear a lot about this great person, this great friend of ours, this brave friend of ours, and this very fortunate friend of ours who has joined the heavens now. We hear a lot about him, which are good or accurate. But I would like to also mention a few points about him. I think they're important. First of all, Martyr Soleimani was brave and also was a person with initiative. He wasn't only brave. Some people are brave, but they do not have the right wisdom and initiative to use that braveness. Some people have initiative, but they are not brave. But this dear martyr of ours had both the bravery, the braveness, wasn't afraid of any danger. Not only in these recent events, but also during our sacred war, when he was the commander of the Sarallah army. He was both with somebody with initiative and braveness. He had wisdom, he had logic for each action he was taking. This braveness and initiative, the ability to initiate, was not only in the military arena, it was also in the political field as well. On numerous occasions, I used to tell all my friends who are active in the political arena, I was mentioning him to other colleagues. He was brave both politically. In the political area, he was both brave and with initiative. He was very convincing, very assertive and effective. More important than this was his faith, his sincerity. The means of initiative and braveness that he had, where he was spending them for God. He was with full sincerity, which is so important. There was no hypocrisy in him. We should exercise these qualities. He also had another quality. He was a brave commander, brave warrior in the military field, but he was also paying a lot of attention to religious issues, to Sharia issues, and the military field, in the battlefield. Sometimes some people forget about God and about the limitations God has provided us with, but he was very careful. For example, when there was no need for using military force or arms, he was not using arms. He wasn't using military force at all. He was making sure that that nobody is oppressed, and he was taking precautions that some people forget about them or think they are not necessary, but he was paying a lot of attention to them. He was facing danger, but he was also making sure that the lives of others are protected. His colleagues, his companions, his soldiers, his friends, his colleagues in other countries who were accompanying him. He was so careful about their lives. Another important point is that when it comes to the domestic issues, the issues that I mentioned, of course, they were about his activities outside Iran. But when it comes to his activities inside Iran, he was not partisan at all. But he was revolutionary, very strongly. Revolution and being revolutionary was his red line. You should make sure that you pay enough attention to this quality of him. He was completely absorbed in the revolution. He was absorbed in the revolution. Being revolutionary was his red line. All these political parties, political factions, partisan issues, he was not interested in them at all. But when it came to the revolution, he was strongly committed to the revolution and to the blessed course that had been set for us by our Imam Khomeini. One example of his braveness and his initiative, his enemies are familiar with this, maybe his friends are not. It was when he was able, with the help of other nations in the region, or by helping the nations of the region, he was able to foil, to do away with all the illegitimate plans of America in West Asia. This way, this person managed to all those plans that were assisted by the American money and American assistance and American diplomacy and American bullying of other politicians, especially in weak countries. He managed to stand against all those plans and that had been prepared for the West Asia region. He managed to get the region rid of all those plans. The Americans' plan for Palestine was to make sure that the issue of Palestine is forgotten. Their plan was to keep the Palestinians weak so that they cannot resist, so that they cannot struggle for their freedom. But this man put a lot of things in the hands of the Palestinians and helped the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, a small area like Gaza Strip. The Gazans struggled so much that the Israeli government, with their force, their power, had to accept a ceasefire in 48 hours. So Qasem Soleimani managed to do this by helping our Palestinian brothers. And our Palestinian brothers have repeatedly mentioned this to me. They acknowledge this. They acknowledge their role of his role. When Palestinian leaders visited us, they have mentioned or they have acknowledged all this assistance they had received from him. The sessions, the meetings that we have had with them, Haj Qasem was sitting even in a corner, and he wasn't even visible. He was so humble. So sometimes we used to look for him in the meetings because he wasn't a man of showing off. The U.S. plan in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon was foiled with the help of this dear martyr. The Americans want to turn Iraq into a regime similar to the regime of Shah in Iran, or to the regime of Saudi Arabia. Like a milking cow. They want to turn Iraq into a milking cow. So the faithful people, the faithful youth of Iraq, the religious leaders in Iraq, they resisted against this plan, and Haj Qasem helped all this huge front as an advisor, as an active advisor, as a huge supporter. Similar to this, it happened in Syria, in Lebanon. In Lebanon, the Americans are willing to, want to they want to get rid of Hezbollah, which is the most important movement of independence, so that Lebanon can be undermined by Israel, like it happened in the decades ago. Hezbollah, thanks God, has been becoming stronger and stronger, and they are the hands of Lebanon, they are the eyes of Lebanon. And the role of our dear martyr was a very bold, a very important one. And his braveness and his initiative. The brave Mujahid, the hard-working and helping brother. The nations are awake these days. But the role of the dear martyr and the local leaders like Abu Mahdi, may God bless him, a great man, a brave man. When you looked at his face, it showed how faithful he was. His face was a divine one, a godly one. Martyr Soleimani was the friend, or the companion of such people who managed to do great things. So this was, you can talk a lot about our dear martyr. Sufficient for the time being. Another chapter about Martyr Soleimani is the blessings of this great martyrdom. The blessings that have been created by this martyrdom. Whenever there was a verbal report or written report given to me by him, I was in my heart and verbally I was commending him. But today, what he has, his martyrdom has created, I actually bow to it. This was a great resurgence, what has happened. A resurrection, a great resurrection, actually. His martyrdom led to this great resistance. Look at how the Iraqi people, how the Iranian people reacted in Khamenei, in Baghdad, in Najaf, in Karbala, what they did. And with the bodies of these martyrs. We are thankful to his clean spirit and soul from the depth of our hearts. His martyrdom shows the liveliness of our revolution to the world. Some people wanted to show that the revolution is dead in Iran. But some people are also trying to make sure that the revolution becomes dead. But his martyrdom shows that the revolution is alive. You saw in Tehran. You saw in other cities of Iran. But the bitter and the sad events in Kerman, when some people lost their lives during the ceremony, funeral ceremony, I'm very sorry for that, and I'm very sad for that. And I would like to express my condolences to their families. And I wish their spirits, their souls, join the soul of Soleimani. The soul of Soleimani. Martyr Soleimani made us awake with his martyrdom. The enemies, when they saw the magnificence of Iranian nation. When they saw that, they became so belittled. Maybe they don't want to show it. An enemy that tries to, when it comes to this great leader of the fight against terrorism, when that enemy tries to introduce him as a terrorist, these unfair, these liar Americans, these nonsense-telling Americans, the nonsense that we cannot give any value to, but the Iranian nation gave a huge blow to their mouth. The slogans of Death to America. The slogan of Death to Israel. Another important point is that, okay, now what should we do? This important thing has happened. The issue of revenge is a different issue. Last night we slapped them on the face, but this is a different issue.
When
it comes to confrontation, military actions of this kind are not enough. What is important is the presence that the corrupt presence of the United States in this region should come to an end. They brought war and hostility and deception and destruction of infrastructures in this region. Whenever they go, this happens. Now we are talking about our own region. And they are still insisting that this corruption, this destructiveness should also be imposed on Iran. They are always talking about negotiations, sitting behind the tables. This means their interference. This should come to an end. Their presence in this region should come to an end. This region does not accept the presence of America here in the countries of the region. The nations of the region, the governments based on the will of the nations in the region do not accept the presence of the United States in this region, the presence of America here. What is our duty as the people, people of the Islamic Republic? First, we should get to know our enemy. We should not make any mistake in knowing and getting to know our enemy. We should not say that, okay, we all know. Yes, you know who the enemy is. The enemy is the global arrogance and the Zionism and America. You know this, of course. But huge efforts are being conducted now, being done now, in order that your views are changed through their propaganda. There are different means of propaganda. So we should get to know our enemy, which is very important. And another thing is that we should get to know the plans of the enemy as to what they are doing, what they're planning to do. And then there is the methods to combat, to confront the plans of the enemy. The people should know this. Our reliance is on the people. The Islamic Republic, without the will of the people, with the help of the people, without the positive wills and votes of the people, the Islamic Republic cannot continue. That will not mean anything. The people should know the enemy and should also know the methods of how the enemies work. And the people should also know how to combat how to fight these methods. And our thinkers, we have a lot of people in this country with initiative and with thoughts, both militarily, scientifically, politically. We have very knowledgeable people, a lot of people with initiative and courage, and that they should be listened to. What they think is advisable across the country, across the society, it should be done properly. We have a lot of trained and educated people who have been educated in the school of our Imam, and that number is increasing day by day. Imam one day mentioned during the war that the victories of this revolution will be the training and education of the youth, and this is what was said by our Imam, and this was very wise. His wisdom was so great. All these victories, when it comes to educating our youth, that can be the most important thing, and we have so many people, educated people now. So we should get to know the enemy. I can say this very clearly, that the enemy is America, the Zionist regime, and the machinery of the arrogance, which is not only America or the governments. It's a collection of companies and others and the plunderers who are against anybody who fights plundering and corruption. These are the enemies. If there's a government in the region or outside the region, sometimes if they might say something against us, they are not the enemies as such. Until and unless they do something in practice for helping the enemy, they will not be the enemies. So the actual enemies are what I explained to you, and we should not make any mistake here. If we knew this, then how to confront the enemy? If we also know that, the map of the plan of the enemy is that our youth, our people, when it comes to different areas and spheres, that the youth and the people are affected in a way that they lose their faith and will in their commitments. The two elements that I mentioned earlier, i.e. faith and religious honor, they are so important. So they're trying to make you doubtful in your faith and in your honor. And this is what the enemy is looking for. They know that if they can do this, then their aggressive power, and they know that if they can do this, then our both aggressive and defensive power will be affected too. So that's why they are conspiring against us. The conspiracies by America is not limited to this. This is the most important one, of course. Against the Islamic Republic in politics, in economics, and you can see the sanctions in the security field. Before these events, before the protests, you could see that what had to do with the price of petrol. In a European country, in a very small European country, but in an evil one in Europe, in an evil country in Europe, there was an American elements with some Iranian traitors. They got together to conspire against the Islamic Republic. The plan was, the conspiracy was that after a few days later we saw with in relation to the price of petrol, the people were of course not happy with the price of petrol. Some people came to protest. But as soon as they came to protest, as some of them came to protest, these betrayed agents of the enemy started to carry out their plan, to sabotage, to fire, to kill, to destroy both government centers, institutions, and also public institutions, and to embark upon a war, actually. So this was a plan, their prior plan. When I say a few days before that, these few days was to refresh their plan that had already been prepared with the help of the enemy and their monies. So they do these things as much as they can. Those days I mentioned here to the people that when things were happening here in Washington, the U.S., the government officials were happy, and they were saying that Iran is coming to an end. Everything is done now. After 2 days, it became clear that their job came to an end, actually, and they were so sad. So we should know the map of the plan of the enemy. We should also target the key points of the plan. The key points are the intellectual aspects, whether it's we should get to know the intellectual aspects, both the revolutionary aspect of it, the Islamic aspect of it, the national solidarity, national unity, the unity that we saw when the body of martyr Soleimani and his companions were carried by the people in the funeral. This unity, this solidarity should be protected. The people's path should be this path, to look after the revolution, look after the values and the revolution and our martyrs. We should also know this, that this front of the enemies against us that I mentioned, this is not only a seasonal one, this is a natural one, this is a permanent one. Whenever they can harm us, they will harm us. What's the remedy? The remedy is that we become strong, militarily, security-wise, politically, economically, in different aspects. We should become strong so that the enemy cannot harm us. Otherwise, their hostility, their animosity towards us is in their nature. If some people think that if we take one step back and if we become a bit moderate, the Americans will stop their animosity. This is wrong. This is completely wrong. Some people say, do not do things that will make the Americans angry. But this is against what the God has said himself in the Quran. In this verse, which says that the growth of the faithful youth is to make sure that the enemy becomes angry. So that's why they're angry. They're angry, they're nervous because of the successes of ours in science and service and military. They're nervous, they're angry with this, all these advancements that we have had. Thank you very much. So this slogan of saying God is great shows that you're tired now. God willing, your voice will be heard and your steps will be strong, and Almighty God will bless our martyrs, Martyr Soleimani, Martyr Abu Mahdi, and their companions. Whether those who are Iraqis or those who are Iranians, they will be blessed. May God bless them, and may God bless and forgive those people who paved the way for our growth and development. Yesterday's resolutions of our parliament and the Iraqi parliament were good, which was to expel the Americans from Iraq. We hope that all of them succeed in what they're planning to do.
All right, so you're watching live pictures there, before we lost them, of the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, giving a pretty wide-ranging speech there following those missile attacks on Iraqi targets for the retaliation of the killing of Qasem Soleimani. He talked about the Iranian Revolution back in 1979 being a pivotal change for the country and the world. He said that Iranians should use the historical lessons of the revolution to confront Iran's enemies today. Not surprisingly, he focused, of course, on Qasem Soleimani, and he spoke at length about Soleimani. He said he had great character and personality. He said he was a brave warrior, a person with initiative. He was sincere and not a hypocrite. He said Soleimani was a very religious man and drew on his faith. He said Soleimani always supported the cause of the Palestinians in their struggle against Israel. And he said the presence of the US in the region should and would come to an end. Let's go to Asad Beg, who joins us live now from the Iranian capital, Assad. So a wide-ranging and sobering speech, the Supreme Leader reminding the nation to draw upon the lessons of the 1979 Islamic Revolution in confronting Iran's enemies today. But he also had some very lengthy praise for Qasem Soleimani, killed in that US drone strike.
Yes, that's right. Qasem Soleimani was a friend of the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And what's also important is it's not usual for the Supreme Leader's speeches to be carried live, and this one was. He also said that yesterday's missile attack against US forces was a slap in their face, and it was time for them to leave the region. But also backing up everything that he's saying, he's giving a theological reassurance, or a theological foundation to it. He said that having military equipment isn't enough, but he did say that Iran did possess the military equipment that would help them stand up to the bullies, and focusing specifically on the United States. He spoke about how outside forces are trying to influence people. He spoke about the protests that took place here in November and how outsiders are trying to infiltrate those protests, referring to some of them as rioters and some of the damage that was done to buildings here. But this is the first speech after the missile attack against the United States, against the United States forces, and something that the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei had said that would happen. He said that we would avenge Qasem Soleimani, and his imagery was used throughout his speech. You saw people in the audience carrying pictures of Qasem Soleimani, and those pictures are all over Iran currently.
All right, to Assad Beg there in Tehran. Assad, thank you very much for that. Let's cross over now to Gabriel Elizondo. He joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Gabe, so we've just heard there from the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Let's talk about President Trump. A rather curious tweet from the president saying all is well following those missile strikes. What can we read into his tweets? And are we now seeing a pause, perhaps a possible off-ramp here for the Americans to defuse this crisis?
Yeah, it's a little bit before 3 in the morning here in Washington, so we do not expect any immediate reaction to the Supreme Leader's speech that you just heard there. Perhaps in the next few hours when Washington wakes up, we will. The only official reaction that we've heard from the White House is this tweet from President Donald Trump. There were some talk or some rumors that Trump would be addressing the nation in a televised speech late on Tuesday, but that did not happen in the end. So all we have is this official tweet from the president. I'll go ahead and read it to you, since this is all we have. It says, "All is well. Missiles launched from Iran at 2 military bases located in Iraq. Assessment of casualties and damages taking place now. So far, so good. We have the most powerful and well-equipped military anywhere in the world by far. I will be making a statement tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning being Wednesday morning here in Washington. So that would presumably be in the next 4, 5, 6 hours or so, since given the early morning hours that it is right now. What to read into that tweet? Pretty much the president trying to put the best spin on this, if you will. I think there's a lot of relief in the White House that no Americans were killed, at least not that we know of at this point. And I think now it is definitely a pause in this until Trump and his aides can figure out what to do next.
All right, Gabriel Elizondo there from Washington, D.C. Gabe, thank you. Well, senior Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has called the missile strikes an act of war.
The missiles were launched from Iran at targets inside of Iraq housing U.S. military personnel. The president has all the authority he needs under Article 2 to respond, and how he responds is yet to be determined, but he has that authority to respond. It was an act of war by a regime for the last 40 years. It's been a cancer in the Mideast. When they say they want to destroy Israel, they're not kidding. They're the largest state sponsor of terrorism.
And Simona Fulton joins us live now from the Iraqi capital. Simona, so we haven't heard any official response yet from the Iraqi government. How will officials in Baghdad now be assessing the Iranian response?
Well, we've had confirmation from the Joint Operations Command that it was 22 missiles that hit both the Ain al-Assad air base in the western Anbar province and near the northern city of Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. 17 of those missiles fell inside the Ain al-Assad air base, specifically targeting the coalition headquarters. The Joint Operations Command said that there were no Iraqi forces who were hurt in this attack, but they did not mention whether there were any Iraqi civilians hurt, and they also did not mention whether there were any American casualties. We understand that the U.S. coalition is still assessing the material damage as a result of these strikes, and we've had no reports as of now about any U.S. casualties. Now, of course, this is the first time that Iran actually strikes an Iraqi base where U.S. personnel are stationed. We've had many rocket attacks targeting these bases over the past 2 months, but all of them were believed to be carried out by Iran's allies here in Iraq, such as the Hezbollah brigades, for example, which is one of the groups under the Iranian-backed Popular Mobilization Forces. And what remains to be seen now, how the government will react. We've had very strong condemnation of the U.S. strike that hit Soleimani, as well as Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, calling it a severe violation of Iraq's sovereignty. So now everybody basically waits for Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi whether there will be similar condemnation of this strike by Iran.
All right, Simona Fulton there in Baghdad. Simona, thank you. And if you're just joining us here on Al Jazeera, let's quickly recap for you what's happened in the last few hours. Iran has fired more than a dozen ballistic missiles at 2 Iraqi air bases that host American forces. It said it was in retaliation to the assassination of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, and he was killed in a U.S. drone strike on Friday. So speaking in the past few minutes, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said his country is united against the bullies of the world. And the U.S. president responded to those strikes on Twitter saying, and I quote, "All is well. Missiles launched from Iran at 2 military bases located in Iraq. Assessment of casualties and damages taking place now. So far, so good." On one other development, the U.S. Federal Aviation Authority has banned American airlines from flying in the airspace above Iraq, Iran and the Gulf of Oman. It says there's a potential for miscalculation or misidentification. All right, well, that's it for now. The news continues here on Al Jazeera. Stay with us. I'll see you in a minute. Bye for now.
India is in the midst of a high-tech revolution with over 1 billion mobile phones. Yet in a country where 1 in 4 can't read or write, how can